Good morning and welcome to the April 10th Lawrence Douglas County Planning Commission meeting. It is a mid-month meeting. It's a public meeting. We get to interact, the commissioners do, and learn. Today's agenda is going to be the Land Development Code. We're going to get an update. But we do not take any comments from the public. The public are welcome to listen, but no comments. With that, I'll turn it over to Becky to go over the rules of the meeting.
Thank you. My name is Becky Pepper. I'm the planning manager, and I'm going to work alongside the vice chair to help facilitate this meeting proceedings. I have a few more housekeeping items before we begin for this hybrid meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself online during this meeting if you're not speaking. The chat function for this meeting is disabled and all chats will go directly to me. And unless you are participating in the meeting, please turn your video off. This allows the active meeting participants to be seen on screen. You'll be able to still hear the meeting. When you are participating, please turn your video on. If you have any trouble, you can send me a chat and I'll try to help you. The city reserves... The city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distraction during the meeting. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the vice chair.
Thank you, Becky. And do we have Elizabeth?
Yes, Elizabeth has joined us.
Good morning.
Okay. Go ahead, Elizabeth. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. We are going to dive into where the Land Development Code update is right now. So I'm going to share screen. And I'm going to bring you guys back so I can see everybody. And I can see over your shoulders that the PowerPoint is up. Oh, I can also see the video. So great. Okay. So let's jump in here. Let me see if I can make this thing go away. There we go. Okay, our project goals, just as a reminder to everybody. We're looking for updating the Land Development Code to meet the city's goals. They're expressed in Plan 2040 and the city's strategic plan and a range of other applicable plans that we are moving into this process. We are updating the Land Development Code to create more predictable outcomes, development outcomes. We're looking at simplifying and streamlining development procedures and overall making the code more user-friendly. So here we are. We are moving ourselves into the last phase of the project, phase 4. It's scheduled to go from March through June of this year, as you can see on this slide, and I outlined that in the green dotted box because adoption will take the time that adoption takes. We had a conversation with Becky Pepper and Jeff Crick, our project managers, about how long to expect for this process. And our guidance is we want to do this well and we want to do it right. And we'll take the time we need as a group with the city to get this right. So our drafting piece is almost complete in terms of the full document. And then we'll see what changes come up through the rest of this process and into adoption. So we spent our last steering committee meeting having a really, really good, very engaged discussion about the equity aspects of the zoning process. And so this is a concept that has taken hold across the country. This is part of a bigger picture of zoning reform. Many communities are engaged in looking at their regulations and understanding how they've worked historically and how they can work better prospectively. So we took a page out of the APA Equity and Zoning Policy Guide and married this with our conversation about process and procedures in Lawrence, and had conversation with the steering committee that we want to share out with Planning Commission today, in addition to talking about changes in Module 3 and moving into adoption. So this is where zoning equity comes from. Those of us who write, administer, or enforce zoning regulations really need to take clear steps to undo unfair outcomes that have been generated by or compounded by unequal ability to participate in all parts of the zoning process. So this is not just Lawrence. We're not picking on Lawrence. This is an idea that is this is taking hold and guiding change to zoning regulations. So why do we want to bring up this topic? In addition to rewriting the Land Development Code, which is its own challenging process. So why are we going into equity? So what we recognize, over the past 20 years, specifically earlier than that, for people in the field thinking about it, is that zoning is a powerful force for determining where people live and work. It has in the past, despite being facially neutral, so despite being written so that it doesn't say certain people do this and certain people do that, it has reinforced racial, ethnic, and income segregation. And in a way that we don't see necessarily in zoning, it affects lending patterns. And so those have tended to limit wealth accumulations in Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. So zoning can't solve all of this to the last bullet, but it can be a part of the solution. And this is a conversation that we want to make sure that we start engaging in. I don't think rewriting the Land Development Code is the be-all and end-all for zoning equity, but we wanted to bring this up within the community. So with steering committee and with the public, we talk about who are the development process participants, who makes this work, right? So we have the applicant and their development team. They typically start a project. So in the United States, most of our development comes from the private sector. And so we have that as one participant in the process. We have the city. So Planning Commission is a big participant in the process. We also have staff review, we have engineering review, and we have city commission in addition to boards. And then we have the community, so the community as participants in the process. And what we want to do in thinking about equity is look at who's involved and who isn't involved, who attends meetings, who doesn't attend meetings, and why we have meetings, to make sure that we're providing opportunities to have all voices be heard at different points in the process. So we have a list of who are our potential community interests, and these are people that may show up at meetings. And then we have a list of who actually shows up at meetings. With steering committee, we had a discussion about whether or not we're getting feedback from across the board. I'm going to switch to some of their comments to share out. So we identified some different project types, time frames, and situations where we do have people involved and where we don't have people involved. So the city gets interest groups involved, and they're invited through social media. They're invited through the typical channels. The city tends to see neighborhood groups, environmental groups, project-specific groups, historic and cultural resources. Sometimes these groups show up and speak. Sometimes they don't. There is a perception that there are requests for delays after multiple meetings where some of the interest groups get involved, and that can be something that slows down the process. Steering committee noticed that groups that are nearer to the project are easier to identify, and they participate earlier in the process. Later participants tend to be further away. And they come to the process perhaps after there have been some conversations about it because they did not realize the impact on them. Large projects have people turn out. I know the city's had some experience lately with wind projects. Wind and solar projects tend to have a turnout. Any sort of large impact project like that. And then conversely, there are some projects where there isn't the turnout you would expect, such as affordable housing projects where any target population struggles to be heard. So just thinking about who's at the table and who's not at the table and who's impacted by these decisions. So we took a look at just a really big picture of Lawrence's review process and how involvement plays out over time. So you can see to the left of this table, before an application is even submitted, we have the developer with their idea, putting time and money into it. So the blue icon is time, the green icon is money. They're developing their idea. They are doing some initial staff review and getting involved. We move into a submission of the application. And so we have now developer and staff deeply involved in the process. Then we get to written public comment. And for many projects, this is the time when we start to get community input. So the conversation we had around this is when, the developer has a significant time and cost investment in the project, and they're getting comments that may involve making changes to the project, months into it, potentially. And then that goes on because we go into planning commission meeting or hearing, or city commission meeting and hearing. Applicant may be making changes, is definitely getting comments. And so what we talked about and what we can talk about as a group in this discussion is there a way to potentially think about how can we do that community input earlier? Can we move some of the comment or add, comment before there's an application? Is that a possibility? Do we want to think about doing it, earlier in the process? We're trying to balance out the time and financial impacts of the project in terms of on the applicant and the comments that they might receive and the changes they might receive. So that's part of the conversation that we're having with this. We can come back to the slide if the group wants to talk about it more. So a big conversation that we had and a way that the land development code is moving is looking at an increase in by right or administrative approvals. And so before I jump into what are we doing here, there can be some misconception about the term by right. And that means that the application meets the city's criteria. It doesn't mean that the applicant goes straight to building permit. But it means that they're zoned properly and the use is allowed and it meets the standards. And so they don't need to have any sort of higher level review. So in terms of changes to the code and changes to how the process applies to development, we've been talking about what types of applications really require a public hearing or a public meeting. Do we need the public involved at as many intervals as we're currently involving them when the code reflects Plan 2040, when it reflects the development that the city wants to see? Is it a better and potentially more equitable outcome when we move to more administrative approvals, provided those approvals meet the city standards and criteria? We also had a discussion and can have a discussion with Planning Commission about how project-specific conditioned approvals impact the future development process. So when we're doing approvals that are site-specific and are heavily conditioned to that site, making change gets to be a cumbersome process. So if we have the property sold or we have a new developer later and we want to make changes, we are constantly referencing backwards or looking at wiping out approvals that were done in the past and moving forward. That all adds time and money to the process. And then finally, who benefits from the current process? The discussion within steering committee was that people with the ability to participate, so in terms of time, money, and interest, tend to be the beneficiaries of the current process. So that's more meetings, more sharing thoughts publicly, and the ability to put things out there. Is that a bad outcome? No, not necessarily. There are some people who should be included in the process. The question is, are there other people who should also be included in the process? So it's not saying that the people who are there are not contributing. It's saying that there's a gap, that this can be additive, and there can be more people who might also have thoughts to contribute to the process. So when we're looking at this by right approval process, that would mean projects approved administratively when they meet clear, specific review criteria. And the big push of rewriting Module 3 is to get to that clear, specific review criteria. And those are generally based on compliance with the Land Development Code standards. So everything we've done previously to get to this point is the applicant complying with that? Is the development complying? Complying with prior approvals where they're relevant to the project. Certainly saying that we may want to step away from conditioned approvals going forward doesn't change what's on the books. And that's a message that we're going to keep putting out there as we start moving into adoption. What is on the books stays on the books. Putting the new code in place changes development going forward. So we're going to have to keep in mind old and new as we start this change. And then finally, conformance with Plan 2040. I've got a few more slides on equity just to share. So we had some steering committee comments. Steering committee emphasized the need for clear and specific review criteria, and then discussed how they might be documented in the approval. So anyone who wants to understand better how the approval process took place can look at it. There was a bigger discussion about education through this Land Development Code adoption process, helping community members understand what zoning and subdivision does, how it impacts the community. And then at a more specific level, we talked about sending out notice letters for administrative approvals. So if we're doing this by right administrative approval, just being clear that we let people know if they want to protest it or appeal it, to elevate it to Planning Commission and City Commission review. So making sure that people that might be impacted by an approval still understand the next steps in the process should they want to take advantage of that. So we kind of rounded out our discussion by talking about some of our institutional norms. We all, Lawrence and pretty much every other community in the country has ways that we hold meetings and hearings in the public realm. This tends to be evening meetings, and they're held primarily in English language, and they're at City Hall. There were good reasons for this. There are good reasons for this. We tend to avoid setting meetings during traditional work hours. Most Planning Commission and City Commission members have full-time jobs in addition to this full-time volunteer position that you do. City Hall is accessible by public transportation, and having our meetings this way is predictable. We've added on over the past 10, 15 years, and that was certainly exacerbated by COVID. We now have website information, and we have availability for virtual participation. Primarily synchronous at the same time as the meeting. The steering committee noticed the plus and minus of Lawrence having pretty busy agendas. It gets some people out to meetings and they may chime in on other projects, but they don't often wait and sometimes they don't participate. This could be, we're kind of guessing here, that the room was scary, so not everyone wants to stand up in public and talk about development. The environment can be sometimes confrontational. It can be sometimes the body is trying to get business done and it doesn't seem as appealing to try to jump in. And the room size can be a little small. The meetings can be a little packed. So just observing some of the situations that might keep people from participating in the process. So we talked about some potential changes, including moving community input to an earlier stage of the process, taking community input formally out of the process, framing the notice requirements to identify potential benefits and impacts. So instead of just saying, hey, we're going to rezone this property, we can say, rezoning may have these benefits and it may have these impacts. Expanding notice. And so these are all things that we're considering, and some of which you'll see in the Module 3 draft when it goes public in the next couple days here. Creating materials about how the zoning process works. about how zoning processes work and what the outcomes mean, making those available on the city website so they're not timed to a specific project, but so that anyone who's curious can find it. Also making that information available to community organizers. Then we talked about potentially developing outreach plans for specific projects that have larger impact, such as a rezoning or PUD approval. Identifying neighborhood or community ambassadors from underrepresented areas or groups, so we can get information out into neighborhoods. We talked about the issues that might need this. We talked about, just at a pretty high level, the idea of compensating community ambassadors for doing this work. And then also formalizing this process, so we're trying to reach areas that are not currently being reached. So that was the big equity discussion. I'm going to finish out the presentation because I don't have a ton of slides left, and then I'm going to back up and open it up to the group so we can come back to any of these and ask questions. So the Module 3 updates, which we have received preliminary staff comments, and I want to thank Becky and Jeff for pushing through and getting that back to us. We are editing. We will have those out in the next couple days. They'll be posted to the city's website. Everyone will be provided information about how to get there, how to look at it, and how to comment on it. So these are the high-level goals that we are working with in this draft, seeking process clarity. So an applicant can understand the process, can help themselves understand the process. So new staff can understand the process. If questions come up about, hey, we've always done it this way, did we get that incorporated in the regulations? So making sure that we all can share expectations from the document about what we're doing with process. The Module 3 draft has a section that describes all of the general review procedures, things that we do time and time again. So what does a pre-application meeting need to include? What does notice need to include? That information exists in the current code, but sometimes it's tied to specific applications. Sometimes it is in the general section, but the general section has some gaps in it. So we've tried to fully explain steps, procedures that may happen across different types of procedures. Similarly, we've described all the steps that happen in specific procedures. We haven't restated the general procedures. We just refer people back to them. So if you have to do a pre-application meeting, please go see this section. The code, I'll remind everybody, the code will be codified in MuniCode. If you haven't worked with MuniCode before, it's an online codification service. This information will be hyperlinked. So if you're trying to use the code, you should be able to fairly readily move yourself back and forth this information. So should applicants. It's public. We, in this draft, have established or updated the review criteria for all the specific procedures. So back to that place of what is the city measuring applications against, and are we clear about that? We have taken out, recommended taking out some language that either explicitly or implicitly relates to density. You can see this little blurb in red here. This came out of one of the procedures. It says review bodies are not required to recommend approval of the maximum density or intensity of use allowed. So we're not saying that the city has to approve maximum density or maximum intensity, but this in a few places in the code seems to say, you know what, as a city, we're okay with doing less than what is being proposed. What we would like for the code to do is implement what Plan 2040 calls for and where the city wants to go with development. So some of this language has been removed. There are some specific timeframes for approvals in the code right now. There are some gaps about timeframes for approvals. Every approval that can lapse now has a time frame. And I say that because some approvals like PUD, rezoning approvals, and some, I believe some subdivision approvals can't lapse. They have to go back through the process. So where something can lapse, what we want is to not have it sit on the books for eternity. We want it to sit on the books for as long as it takes to move to the next step. or to get the use up and running. If it's not up and running in 2 years or 3 years or whatever it is, really the city should have the opportunity to review an application again on the site. Whatever that wasn't going to work there, or that applicant wasn't going to be able to make it work. So the goal here is to clean out some of those prior approvals and start with a clean slate when development comes through. A few more changes. We're still working on improving the PUD review and approval process. We think we have worked our way through it. It was a little complex, a little more complex than it probably needs to be. Staff has flagged it for cleanup and for additional cleanup, so we're going to keep working with staff to get to an easier to understand and follow process. We have reconsidered a couple or 3 infrequently used processes and just moved them into a different location. They might be used once or twice, a year or a decade. It'll be in the code, but it doesn't need kind of the same amount or highlighted space as some of the other procedures. We have added a process for administrative adjustment, so that is one of the places where we're getting to flexibility within the regulations. We're working on changing the site plan thresholds so that the city has 2 sets of site plans right now. There's minor, standard, and major. And I think we've recommended going with does not need to comply with development standards and needs to comply with development standards, which is a mouthful. Hopefully we're going to come up with better names for that. But it is essentially kind of something in the minor to standard range has been kind of mashed together, and then major. And the idea is in that minor standard, if there's already development on the site, already approvals on the site where we want to see development take place, you can move through the development process more quickly, and you do not need to bring the entire site up to compliance with the whole new code. You can do that more incrementally. However, if you're doing something major, then complying with the entire code is exactly where the city wants to see you going. Then finally, the updates in Module 3. Module 3 includes procedures, it includes the general provisions at the beginning of the code, and it includes nonconformities and violations. So we've started the process of identifying for multi-step approvals. Does the second step, that later step application, need to be in compliance with the new code, the 2024 LDC, or the older code? That's the 2026. We called it 2026 code. It'll probably be 2006 code, 2006 LDC at the end. So a lot of cleanup in Module 3, a lot of trying to get to clarity, trying to get to a place where applicants can understand what's going on. Not as much external change as we've done in some of the other modules, but still really pretty meaningful. And we're still trying to, in our conversations moving forward about Module 3, make sure we're coming up with the right places where projects can get stuck. So before I move into the last few slides, I will let you know that we did a survey of the development community and of city staff to try to understand where we run into mismatched expectations and holdups in the development application process. We are just about finished with moving through that survey information, the consultant team is, and providing a more complete PowerPoint presentation of what we've heard. And we're trying to really understand, as we, the consultant team here from the development community, it takes so long to get an application approved in Lawrence. And as we also hear from staff, hey, it takes us 2 or 3 times to get an applicant to submit the information that they should be submitting to move applications forward. That sort of higher level, what's going on here and what changes can we make to adjust it. We will share that back out with steering committee and the entire community, including planning commission, and post that on the project website. So we'll let you know when that's up, again, in the next few days, review it with steering committee and come back to you. I think we have a meeting with you next month and share some of that information and how we've addressed it. Okay, now really last few slides. I want to remind you about the big updates that we talked about at our last meeting. And this will all be content that we're going through as we move into adoption, right? So I want to kind of remind everybody this is what we've got going, and we do have a list of questions that you shared with us at the last meeting. So the code allows more housing types in all residential districts. It allows a range of smaller lot residential development types. More areas of the city will be zoned mixed use. Renewable energy systems, so non-utility scale, so that can be personal or kind of lot or area sized, are allowed by right and as accessory uses. There are bicycle transportation connections and parking requirements. We have eliminated the minimum parking requirement and replaced it with a parking maximum. Planned development projects require specific public amenities. And I'm sorry, I know that word amenity is unhappy for some people. They require specific contributions to the community in terms of sustainability or affordable housing. And there are stream buffer requirements. These are the biggest changes. When we come back to it the next meeting, we are working on a summary table of what changed and what stayed the same. We had a discussion about this last time, and we will have that in slide format for you so we can talk through it. So we're getting ready to move into the adoption process. So I wanted to do a pop quiz with you. I thought you might need a pop quiz at 8:01 a.m., don't we all? So we're going to get some conversation going as we start the adoption process, and people on the Planning Commission, people on the City Commission, on the steering committee, and in the public will have different expectations for when this code is ready to be adopted. And so I thought we'd start addressing that right now, because we will actually disappoint some people as we go through the process, and we will not look to disappoint them in terms of, wow, this is a bad product. But there will be some places where we, as Planning Commission and City Commission, decide that the code is working when not everyone agrees with that. So category A at the top. So when are we ready for adoption? Are we ready for adoption when the LDC is perfect, or when the LDC aligns with and implements Plan 2040? Let's just vote out loud. Who's in for perfect? Should we hold on for perfect? No. Okay, we're not going to get there, but we're going to hear about it, right? So we're going to go through the draft. We're going to spend time on the draft. The consultant team and staff team is going to spend time with the public talking about the draft. We will all be having this discussion. We will still have, and I'm not sure who, but we'll know, people who do not want to adopt it until we have gone line by line, word by word, through everything with everyone, which is not super feasible for regulations. So we want to make sure that we're setting our goal for moving into adoption when we're doing the right thing, which is aligning with and implementing the plan. Second one is not as simple, actually. So when are we ready for adoption in terms of public comment? Option one is when everyone has had lots of time to review and comment on it. And option two is when there's been reasonable effort to involve the community in the process, and the LDC has been available for review. Right, so everyone who's ever worked with an attorney realizes that I totally signaled the right answer by putting the word reasonable in there. Sorry, I should have caught that. We are coming into a point in the process where we're going to start this push-pull on how much time do we need to review it. There isn't a right number here. Similar to the perfect, we need to get to, we've had it available, we've talked about it, we've provided plenty of really good opportunities to talk about it, and it's time to move it forward. So what do we do about the disappointment on this? Because someone may come to us and say, hey, you know, I found this thing and you guys are halfway through adoption. We remember the code's a living document, and we're setting it up for amendment down the road. So in terms of our effort with Planning Commission, with City Commission, Steering Committee, and the public, we want to make sure that we are getting out there and we are talking to people and we are making this draft available. We will have people that come to the process now. We will have people that come to the process when the adoption hearings start, and we will have people that come to it on the last day. And for reasons they haven't heard about it, they didn't know about it, or they weren't ready to talk about it. That's all okay. What we want to do right now is make our best effort to get out there. Okay, and then last one, when are we ready for adoption? When we've achieved full consensus on the major changes, or when Planning Commission and City Commission find that the changes meet the intent of the city moving forward. This is perhaps the trickiest of our categories because we would like consensus on the major changes in the code. The thing is, though, that in order to make the major changes to the code that the city wants to see, we are changing process and we're changing outcomes, and we are going to have code users who don't want to make those changes. And so we will get pushback. Some of the pushback will be great. It will be great input on the project. We will decide to make changes based on that conversation. Some of the pushback will be met by, we're sorry, but when we adopted the plan and we decided to see change in the city, this is going to be how it goes forward. And so we need to make sure that we are all good with the policies that we're implementing. And if we're not good with the policies that we're implementing, this is a great time to think about them. But on the whole, we are choosing a way forward. And in making choices, we will find that there are some people who do not agree with those choices. So I want to put that out there. We're going deeply into change, right? And there'll be people who are super excited about it and people who are way less excited about it. So we'll get ready for that and we'll talk about it. We have no intention, I am sure, as a group of keeping people out of the conversation. But just because they're in the conversation does not mean that we're going to make the change that they really want to see. So kind of bearing that in mind, just warning you that drafting the code wasn't the challenging part. Adopting the code is the challenging part. Okay, one more slide. So what if we did something wrong, right? We're doing all of this. What if we did something wrong? Well, odds are good we did something wrong. I am positive I've done something wrong. Thankfully, we get a few more goes at drafting this thing, so we have some time before adoption. But if something wrong goes through adoption, it could be wrong in a variety of categories. And we have to figure out for ourselves what it means before we jump into saying either, oh no, the code doesn't work, or, oh my gosh, we have to change it now. Because those are our immediate responses. We've got something new. We need to give it some time to work it through. But we're going to have someone come in, meeting one, day one, after it gets adopted, and they're going to say this is wrong. So if it's a drafting error, we're going to work with staff, with Planning Commission, with City Commission to come up with our first year amendment process and talk about how we work through that. A drafting error should go in the next editing packet. We'll have some timeframes on edits. Unless it's a significant drafting error, it can wait. Really, it can wait 90% of the time. So then we have this whole category of errors that we want to watch for a minute, something that we want to look at and see if it is something small or something big. So if an applicant comes in with a complaint, they don't like what they're going to get out of the land development code, we need to sort that out. We need to kind of parse it into, is this a land development code problem? So is there a drafting problem here? Or is this because this applicant has always built 14-story purple buildings and we have all of a sudden said no more 14-story purple buildings in Lawrence, right? We need to figure out where they are and what they're doing. If we start seeing unanticipated outcomes, so we thought we were going to get some small lot development and instead all we're seeing are 10-acre single-family development, we need to understand if we need to look across the applications and see if we have some site-specific problems, hey, you had a stream going through the middle of the site, or do we have a larger pattern? And if it's a larger pattern, it needs to be fixed in the code, so that can be done through code amendment process. Then we have the pairs of, are the regulations overly restrictive or underly restrictive? So you'll see that in terms of outcomes, what's coming through. And that amendment is not to say, hey, we don't want that development, but it's to look at what flexibility options did we put in the code and what standards apply to this type of development, and how can we adjust those, either tighten them up or loosen them up. And then finally, as policymakers in the city, the code may be in place for a while, maybe in place for 6 months, maybe in place for 6 years. Planning Commission may recommend, City Commission may decide, hey, we follow a policy here that isn't working for us anymore. And so when the new policy is identified and stated, then there will need to be amendment across multiple sections of the code. So this is next steps after adoption. It's the, let's wait and watch and see what we do here. Just a reminder. So one of the things about the new code is that it's being put in place as a living document. The old code was too, and it's been worked on, and it's been changed, and it's been updated. Same thing here, living document. It's organized to accommodate these changes, so future edits, updates, and revisions. So what I try to remind everybody is adoption day is a day in time, right? We're making changes, and we're seeing what comes from them, and we may still make changes to the code. So I think I'll talk about next steps. We have one steering committee meeting in April coming up fairly quickly here. We will go through module 3 with the steering committee and talk about the changes that we made. We will post the entire draft. The full code will be posted with module 3 because we've been rolling it all up together. So if you've looked at it lately, it's already got the content for module 1 and the content for module 2. As soon as we get module 3 rolled in, the whole code will be up. So we have consolidated draft ready to go. We kind of skip from module 3 to consolidated pretty quickly. We will be looking for more steering committee input. We will be upping our conversations with Planning Commission and City Commission so we can start giving you more details about what's in that draft and where it is, and talk about what you might want to do with it. We will be doing community review and discussion across the next few months in as many ways as we think will get us feedback from the community. Then we'll make edits. So we'll do one last round of edits to that full draft based on what we've heard. And then we'll move that into the adoption process. That is today's presentation. So I'm going to ask if anyone wants to go back to anything, or if it was so awesome, you're ready to go.
Hey, Elizabeth, this is Gary. Thank you so much for this great presentation this morning. A question I want to ask for myself and maybe for the rest of the commissioners. This is a group of people that are going to be chartered with making a recommendation on this code update to the city. And it's not a group that traditionally rubber stamps things. So there's a massive amount of information that we really think about. In your experience, do you have any suggestions or guidance for us on how we might individually approach getting at our own understanding of this, and how we might, to the degree that we can come back in a month and have really relevant questions, relevant thoughts on changes that we would like to see?
That's a great question. Hold on, I'm going to stop sharing and look at you guys. So there are a few different ways to do this. First and foremost, for anyone who's inclined, the whole draft will be posted. So if you want to go through it and review it and bring back specific questions, that's great. That's a lot. And there may be sections that are more interesting to you and sections that are less interesting to you based on your background and the information that you bring to Planning Commission. So dive into those things that are more interesting. What we also do, in answer to Gary's question, is we put together a full presentation for you where we talk about what's changed and what hasn't changed. I think what might be beneficial to sort of jumpstart the adoption process is if we get that out to members in a memo format instead of making you wait till May for the next presentation. And so Usually we find highlighting changes or not changes triggers that issue in people's minds. So they're like, oh yeah, I wanted to go look at what was going to happen with the lighting, the exterior lighting thing, or I wanted to see those changes that they made in the PUD section. So our goal is to get the information to you in multiple formats to see what triggers your interest, and then make sure that we can bring that information to you and talk about it. With other planning commissions, we've done that in the form of just summarizing the basic contents, or we've gone set up, meetings where we give ourselves a couple hours to go line by line through, 3 or 4 key sections and provide comments on it. Usually we start by providing you that higher level information, and the process kind of takes its own shape as you as members dive in and start figuring out what it is you want to talk about. So we'll start by guiding you, but we'll back up and keep asking, is there anything else? Do you want to talk about this? Going back through those higher level comments, because we want to make sure that you are at a comfort level as this document moves forward. Is there anything else, Gary, that you'd suggest in there, or anyone else would suggest?
That sounds great. I'd love to see that that higher level in the hands of the commissioners, just as soon as we can.
Okay.
We'll be able to come back to you certainly between now and next month's mid-month. But we have this idea that we want to, through this meeting, working over the next month, and then into the May mid-month, be able to get to a point where we've absorbed this and that we're ready to go into a public meeting, ideally ending with a recommendation. So
Okay.
I do have
started
a
earlier, it's going to be
suggestion.
helpful.
I do have a suggestion, if it's feasible at all. I'm wondering if it's possible, one way to look at this might be to present some examples of past projects and how they were originally treated going through the process, and what that process would look like with the new LDC. Take an example from the past of a big rezoning project. Take an example of a smaller variance, let's say, and have a few of these and run them through. Here's how it happened under the old code, and here's how it happened with the new code. I think that would highlight some of the changes and the impacts of those changes. Would that decision have been different? How would it have, how would the outcome have changed or not changed? Is that possible? And does that sound like something that people?
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Anybody else?
I would like that. I think that is a good idea, a way to compare with concrete examples. So I think I would like that.
Go ahead.
I would also like to ask Elizabeth to think about whether it's feasible to have a memo and some of these longer discussions as a public meeting, because there are going to be lots of people who haven't seen any of this until the end. And Elizabeth, you do such a fabulous job in your presentations, and you take the sense of adversity out of the conversation. And I think that's very important, to start with the public with a more neutral, fact-based presentation. I
appreciate the comment. I am positive my adult children would not agree with you in the slightest, but I think that is the other piece of what we're doing here. But I didn't have it lined up the same way you're suggesting it. So what I hear you saying is, rather than us talking at the public, saying, hey, here's what's going on, take these same big picture questions and invite them to engage in this discussion, and let you guys know what we're up to and when we're up to it, so you can listen to it, or we can report back what we're hearing. Does that sound about right?
I think it does, and I think traditionally, as you've noted, we have had evening meetings, and I think that you've been doing an awful lot of good work, but not always at times when people can attend. And I think I would appreciate being part of listening to what that discussion is.
Okay. Okay.
How successful do you think you have been in getting the underrepresented populations involved in this?
Not super, quite honestly. And so we've been doing a little bit better since the beginning of this year, and have started working with the city's diversity and inclusion team. But we recognize that us moving way out further into the community and doing more one-on-ones and figuring out how to find ambassadors into underrepresented communities is super important for this last stage of the process. So I hope to report back to you that we have a plan and success coming up over the spring. It's high on our list of things we want to accomplish before this code goes into adoption. It would be, pretty uncool of me to say the city should do this, but I don't have to. So that is something that we need to get going and do well.
We've tried a lot of different ways and avenues to try to get at that over the years, and we're still trying to figure out what's the best way to do it, because all the things we knew in 2019 no longer apply in the world in that respect. And so we're trying to really learn how to meet the public where they're at, how to engage them, how they even want to engage. To Commissioner Eldridge's point, it may not be at a meeting, a planning commission. It may be a neighborhood meeting. It may be on a different schedule altogether that we're not aware of. And so we're trying any number of ways. So if there's any thoughts or ideas, we're absolutely open to figuring that out.
I was wondering, would it be possible to have this on like an evening meeting agenda where we talk about it? And I don't know how we do this with taking public comment and, but not having it go to a vote, because it seems like that tends to be when people start to hear about it, is like when it's coming before the Planning Commission. A lot of people will come and start to talk about it, and it gets conversation started. And I hate for that to happen for some communities in June when we're ready to take a vote on it. And so I don't know if that's one way to kind of get the ball rolling with comments and getting people involved. But people seem to get involved about the time the Planning Commission sees it, and sometimes that's kind of late in the process. And since this is a legislative thing, it might not be late in the process to kind of have that as one platform to get community conversations started.
That was one of the ideas. That's why you've seen it both at your mid-months and also at your business meetings, is to try to elevate it and try to highlight it. It's also why we brought it to the city commission on an occasion or two, is to get that conversation rolling there too. But it's a possibility for sure. It's just a matter of, it would be some pretty large chunks to take off to keep on task, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, I just wonder.
Would it make sense to handle this somewhat like the county commission is handling solar, in that they have the special meeting coming up Saturday, and knowing that it's going to take several hours and there's going to be lots and lots and lots of public comment about it, but to have a special meeting to handle this simply so that certainly the public comment side of it can be heard. And I say that knowing we all have plenty of meetings we have to attend already.
And I'm not opposed to that at all. I think that's definitely one potential possibility. I guess I was just kind of thinking like getting the ball rolling while people can make public comment and changes and things can still be incorporated and they can still be a part of the process, versus public comment listened to and then vote taken. And I really appreciate what we've done over the last year or more by having presentations in our monthly meetings and things. I just think a lot of the community doesn't necessarily understand at 7:30 in the morning. We get together and talk about some of these things. I don't know that they necessarily come for public comment at some of the meetings where we've discussed this. So I was just trying to think about different ways to like bring them in before it was quote unquote too late.
I think some of that's getting addressed at the steering committee, because they're receiving comments and having those conversations, getting that public input. So I think it's actually happening. Some of that's happening at that steering committee level too. And what you see online, if you've seen, the current draft of Module 2, is people can go into the PDF and leave comments and suggestions and highlight all the blocks of text and different things in there and say, this is maybe not this, but maybe that. So I think they're getting that. You're getting a lot of that comment. It's just occurring at the next level down. And if I can use that to springboard off into one thing too, is I'll bring you back to that memo that was on your committee, on your Monday meeting last month, about the process and what that will look like. And so if you do send it back, it goes to the steering committee for continued conversation, because it does not follow the land development code process for amending. It follows the state statute. So it would return to steering committee before returning back to you for consideration of a recommendation. So just want to highlight that memo again, because that process is very different than what you see in the development code.
I think part of the inequity issue can just be awareness, not just availability. We're all dealing with this question around the land development code and how it guides the planning process. But I'm guessing a significant number of folks who are underrepresented in this process don't even understand the process. And taking a step back and just talking more about, like, what is the land development code? How does it fit into the work of the city? Who guides it? Who participates in it? Just almost like a bit of a civics lesson on what it is to help people understand why they should care about it. It would be helpful.
Has there ever been a similar education session, for lack of a better word, done by the planning department for the community?
I think in 2006, there was quite a bit of that.
Probably. That predates me. I can't speak on that one. My only concern with that one is, though, that we don't have the staffing to really kind of handle something like that at this point in time. That would be peeling other projects off and kind of backstaffing it for some degree. It's a possibility for sure. It just would mean, the neighborhood planning efforts and some applications, some other of those kind of non-pressing applications may be tabled for a minute to allow that to go through. But that is a possibility.
Could I ask, what division of the city is it that runs the outgoing surveys? Is that a common staff, and could they be relied on or appealed to help with that?
So
because I think when I get these surveys, it's like, the city's doing this, we want to hear your voice, and that's very well guided, but it still comes with the presumption that I understand what it is I'm expressing my opinion on.
Typically, that would come from the division or the department running the survey. We do get help from city communications, but ultimately it'd be planning that would be running that survey. But that, again, that's a tool that we've used previously in the past, and we've tried to make that a lot more less planner ease, I guess is the best way to describe it. Less high-level planner text, more actual words people tend to use. So we could always work with communications to do that one, but that would be planning staff that would be ultimately kind of crafting and working to revise that. But again, not impossible, just to be a bit of a redirection in the work program for us.
Sure. Yeah, because I think part of my concern in hearing, like, the two parts of this meeting, the first half of your presentation, Elizabeth, was all about inequity. And what can we do to control inequity? And like you said, as you kind of observed near the end here, in a way, we are reproducing that inequity by just saying, we know that this is an issue, and here's how we're continuing with doing things the way we've been doing things for the past 2 years. Yeah. And it would slow things down, but taking that step back to help educate the public that this is even happening, and to Chelsea's concern about how late this public awareness comes in the process. I'm guessing most of the folks that I talk with don't know this is happening. Yeah,
I think, and this is going to sound like an excuse. It's more of an observation. This is common across projects where we've done just tons of outreach, and common across projects where they've said, nobody ever shows up, so why would we do the outreach? So yeah. This project has leaned into more outreach in different places at different times. But I think just in terms of how we know community involvement can take place in Lawrence, particularly when people, find that there's a big issue that they coalesce around. We want to see if we can tap that somehow. We wanted to hear, I say we, even though I didn't make any of my colleagues get up for this fun this morning. We wanted to hear from you guys. We are also going to do an outreach plan. So when we send you the summary memo with the big picture issues, it will have an outreach plan attached to it. And we can look for you perhaps to submit comments back to Becky and Jeff if you have noticed anything to be specifically workable or specifically, oh my gosh, what a headache you guys are going to create when you try to do that thing. So we'll take the comments that you've just suggested, work them into what we've seen work in other communities and what we are seeing work in terms of equity outreach and underrepresented communities in places that have really gone all in on that, and build a plan around that and share it back with you so you'll know where we are and what we're doing. In my super secret scheme to move back to Lawrence for a few weeks and talk to every single person.
Thank you so much.
I guess it's not secret anymore. It's out, but there it is.
I think that sounds wonderful. I think one thing that just highlights part of the issue that I kind of see is the idea of coming up with an outreach plan soon and yet a vote soon as well. So it's like we have two, if we're wanting to have us review this in May and vote in June, and like just now still be thinking about the outreach plan to reach people. That really, I think, highlights my actual concern. So if we have a outreach plan and people start to learn about it, and then in May we're supposed to be able to kind of have already taken that input and have our questions ready and then be really kind of ready to vote in June, that seems like a pretty short time frame if really we still have a lot of outreach left to do.
Well, let's remember, remember a few things. We've been at this for a while, and we have done outreach across the project. This is not the first round of outreach. This is the disbelievers round of outreach and the people we didn't hit the first time. Those groups who are most impacted by the code in terms of their everyday work are definitely involved. We want to reach a specific group of people who may not have heard about the project through regular means. What we know from looking at how outreach works in other communities, a lot of people have seen the outreach. It does not mean that they have chosen to become involved. We have worked to build awareness of it. We will continue to work to build awareness of it. I think we move forward as we're currently scheduled, knowing that we can have a discussion about, okay, so, all of a sudden we had, 200 people show up and they were all interested in something. That might be meaningful. What is more likely is that we will educate some people about zoning. We will hear from a few more people about zoning, but not that the entire city is going to show up. So let's take that thought and hold it, because certainly if we have done something that is going to have a storm of people showing up, we want to be able to hit the brakes. But let's also remember that it's, despite the fact that we're going to try yet again to do different ways of outreach, it's still zoning code, and a lot of people are going to say, I want nothing to do with that. If we were doing alcohol code, we might get more people involved. If we were doing recreational marijuana, we might get people involved. But maybe we reset goals on this to, from receiving lots of comments to, hey, we can really make a dent in this education piece right now. It's timely. And we can, if we get out there and teach people who don't understand how zoning impacts them, how it impacts them, and we've made good changes in the code that align with the other values the city has, that's progress for where we are with this project. Does that sound reasonable? Would you add to that?
I think part of my concern is that when I hear kind of who this outreach plan might be for, it is those people and those citizens who will be affected, who might not know that they're going to be affected. So, I get what you're saying. And I by no means think that we haven't had opportunities for people to weigh in. But I think coming back to David's education piece, some people just don't even understand the importance of weighing in, and that's a really tough balance, and it's not something we can solve here overnight or in the next 2 months to strike, to solve the problem, but hopefully we can strike the right balance, or just at least keep that in mind as we continue to think about when we hear public comment, how much public comment we hear, what we need to do to educate and make sure we don't rush the process.
I share some of that concern, and I share the concern, it seems to me, that the largest change we have coming in the future is a greater variety of residences in any neighborhood. And I think many people have bought houses and been parts of neighborhoods that they understand and that they believe in. And I think the proposed changes may be dramatic as more people become aware of the code. And I think it's better to get out ahead of that and start talking about why those changes are and why they're happening now. I think everybody got on board with the idea that we've got to do more about homes for people. But does that mean next door I'm going to have a duplex, or I'm going to have 2 houses, and it's all going to become rental, and we aren't going to be able to have our neighborhood picnics anymore, and we're not going to be able to have kids who go to schools because they're all going to be students? We've got to deal with that, I think, in bolder ways than we have so far.
Hey, Elizabeth, the question for you. So when we were drafting the wind regulations, the subcommittee would go out into the community. Usually we'd be invited. Somebody would reach out to us and say, hey, we want to learn about it. And so we would just go, the 4 of us, sometimes 3 of us, sometimes 2 of us, whoever was available, and just get feedback. And it was a way for us to meet people, and it was a way for us to learn what the concerns were. If we get similar requests from the public, are you the person that would be organizing something like that? Is that even possible to have some kind of just a round table, informal setting?
I think that's a great idea. For the periods of time when I'm in town, I can certainly make that happen. I think I'd want to talk with Jeff and Becky about staff availability to have a neighborhood outreach team, maybe a couple people who could do exactly that. Just here's the basics. Here is our frequently asked questions sheet, and here's how you can be involved. And here are some of the, here is how we can explain the project to you, and some places that you might want to get into it and share your thoughts. I think that's a great idea for part of our outreach. How did it come about that neighborhoods or just smaller areas asked for that? Who did they reach out to on the solar stuff or the wind stuff?
Well, I mean, I could speak to the wind stuff. I mean, it was it's something that really people were very. It's an emotional issue, right? And so I don't think it took much for people to just hear about it and want to learn more about it. So I think this is maybe not as in your face as wind, or solar. So I think, it's going to be different.
Okay. Okay, so we can.
I would think
Go ahead.
as many strong neighborhood associations as there are in Lawrence. It's just reaching out to each one of those with the option of say, hey, if we're going to do this, would you guys be open to it?
And I do.
I assume. Go ahead, please.
No, please, David.
I was just going to say, I assume LAN has been an active participant in the process.
LAN has been a participant in the process. I'm not sure I would go to active. I do know that we had some good participation in the About Your Neighborhood part of the project. I don't know. Becky and Jeff, do either of you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I was also going to add that we do have a neighborhood representative on the steering committee.
One thing about the neighborhood associations, though, once again, we're stuck in the same problem as the people who show up for neighborhood meetings are also the people with time and money, and you're still not getting to people. These are people who are involved in the process already. They kind of have at least some understanding of what's going on and how it impacts them. it's a really difficult thing. How do you reach those people that don't pay attention until a yellow sign pops up next door?
And that was actually one thing I was thinking about is the way that we're talking about it when you talk about land development code. No offense to all of the planners in the room, you do wonderful work, but yeah, I don't get super excited about zoning and codes in that way. But kind of along what Jane was saying, I think if we couch this in the terms of these are the things that this is where we implement our desires for affordable housing. This is where we implement our desires for renewable energy, because we've seen a lot of people come out for those things. And so having a discussion about, if we do, I noticed on there that there is personal scale utility, but nothing about a broader adoption of renewable policies through the city. So if we were to have a conversation about that and about how that can be represented in this land development code for the city and how the city can lift that up, and the same thing with affordable housing, I think a lot more people would be inclined to show up and understand that what the zoning code is doing is codifying some of these values that we've been hearing about quite a bit in the last year and a half, 2 years in the community. And so I don't know how we do that or phrase that, but shaping the conversation around this is how we actually affect these changes may get more people involved to understand really what this is about versus just the variance for an alleyway.
Right. I agree.
I think to have all the ideas brought out. Now, I know we are not open to public comment, and I've had my back turned to a group over here and over there. And at the same time, after the meeting is over, then I'd like to hear why you're here. What brought you here? How did you find out about it? We have a group here that has demonstrated interest. And so when we're done, I want to pick your brain and see what's going on and get your ideas. But I think to get it down to the specifics that Chelsea was talking about, I think that's important to say, gosh, guys, this is why it's important. We're going to talk about affordable housing. We're going to talk about who is my neighbor, who is going to make it so specific. I think that is one of the keys, but it is a multifaceted approach. And I know, from hearing, this committee has attempted to do that.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. We have attempted to do it, and we're not done. So we have had some preliminary conversations with the city's communications team about bringing a different part of the story forward, as you guys were talking about. So not, hey, this is the land development code. This is about affordable housing. This is about renewable energy. And so that is part of what we'll be doing, trying to make it, more specific to people. Our challenge, and you guys have actually kind of circled this in this last bit of conversation, is for some people, whether or not they're involved or never involved, it's not going to be relevant until that sign goes up on the property next door. So short of doing some fake out signs saying, land development code and putting them in every yard in the city, we'll take your input and we'll do our level best to see what we can shake out over the next few weeks and go from there. And that's part of why we say, after you adopt it, there are going to be some changes. There are going to be some people who decide that they, want to be involved about 24 hours after it gets adopted. That's all okay. It really is. It's not set in stone. So our commitment to you, our commitment to the city is, any stone that we can turn between now and adoption, we will be turning. And, apart from that, hopefully moving it into adoption will gin up some conversation. That's when the disbelievers or the unbelievers who, said the city will never do it. That's when they realized the city may well do this and they want to show up and say something. So, let's see how much further we can kick the door open and who we get to come through it.
Riffing off your fake yellow sign there, I'm not a marketer by any stretch, but using the social media and other, and targeting certain social media sites, whether it be Facebook groups or, I don't know, TikTok groups, I'm just imagining a graphic that shows something specific about this is what zoning code means, and you can have your white picket fence house with a big apartment next to it and say, this is what the development code means, or something like that, just to bring, to kind of the shock value of just the graphics of what that means. Commercial development next to residential development. That's what we're talking about. But we're also talking about open spaces, and we're also talking about stream buffers. And I can just imagine a series of sort of dramatic graphics, of, a stream with concrete up to the side of it versus a stream with some native vegetation to the side of it to show, well, these are the kinds of things that happen with changes to development code.
I like that.
I like it a lot. I just would request that it go in the newspaper for those of us who aren't on Facebook, who don't know what TikTok is.
Yeah, right. Well, there is, does the city work with, there is a relatively new position, communications position. I can't remember the exact title of this individual. Is that something that the planning department can utilize?
Yeah, I would have to check with them on what options are available to us, but that's certainly who we'd be working with our communications department on in that kind of aspect, for sure.
So I remember discussing at some meeting before how well it went when there was a particular name. It was the Old West Lawrence neighborhood and the traffic implements that were being adopted, and apparently that was the public outreach was very well received during that issue. So, and there was an individual who helped coordinate that. So this is a much larger lift, community-wide.
This is on the topic, but off perhaps, a shout out to what the Open Spaces group has done.
Yes.
If you go out to Lone Star, you will see the first Open Spaces project is not complete yet, but it will be for bicycle riders to have a stopping place, to have a repair place on an Open Spaces lot at Lone Star.
Oh, great.
Yes. So Open Spaces funded some of it. I guess the feds funded some of it. 4 acres out there that helps me understand what Open Spaces is about. And that's what we need to do with people on this. Here is how it affects you. This is what it means. And to make it concrete rather than some abstract something or other.
Yeah, it's just because this is where those values can really take impact, and this is where those values can really make a difference throughout the entire city versus project by project. And we hear so much of these things when we're talking about individual projects. And sometimes conversation goes to, well, it meets code, it meets code. Well, it meets code. And if this is the code we're talking about, then those values really need to be incorporated into the code in a way that the public has had an opportunity to weigh in on that for thinking about these larger issues and the larger plan. And I do think sometimes those of us who don't live in the zoning and codes world don't really necessarily equate this section with open space or this section with affordable housing. And so it'd be great to try to get that conversation started before we're looking to vote on it.
And I think going further, it will make future planning commissions more comfortable with the fact if we've had this conversation up front, then yes, there will be uncomfortable conversations going forward, but yet at the very least, we can feel more comfortable and more assured that, as best as possible, this community has had input and has been educated. And so there's a certain level of comfort. Well, okay, here we go. Going forward, this is what we said we wanted the community to look like, and we're gonna go forward
Right.
from here, and not fight it out every.
Right.
I mean, there's obviously
Block by block
all the
by
other
block.
considerations
Yeah.
that we're supposed to take into consideration, the
Obviously,
comp plan
yeah,
and all that,
yeah.
but but it would definitely, I think, go a long way towards meeting the code, that we're really comfortable that the community has taken the comp plan values and the community has spoken, and tried to make those, available.
You know, in fairness, a lot of that work has already been done, because going all the way back to 2022 and the review of the 2006 code, the attempt to reconcile it with 2040, bringing the public up to speed with what has been done over the past 2 years can help a lot. And forgive me, Elizabeth, that's probably absolutely part of the outreach plan. But I think that idea of recapping the work that's already been performed and what was the justification for it will be really helpful.
Yep. Yeah. No, this is all helpful.
I have an unrelated question, if I may. Would you help clarify how we have a process for administrative adjustment how does that fit with the desire for clarity and specific by right kinds of things? That almost sounds like it's an adjustment that only staff can do.
It is. So, and this is the fun part, right? Because we need flexibility and predictability. So we're all going to learn how we do that. So the administrative adjustment process allows a limited number of measurable adjustments to measurable standards. So let's say, for example, I needed to put something on my lot, and it was going to work a whole lot better if I could just move my setback 1 foot closer to the lot line. So the administrative adjustment allows whoever is doing the staff review on that to do, up to a 20% adjustment of a measurable standard. So let's say my setback is 100 feet, and I can do a 20% adjustment of that. I've got enough that I could get my extra foot in there. So it's really only those things that we can measure out that way. And one of the discussions that we have about the administrative adjustments is how much wiggle room are we comfortable with, right? So if we allow those changes, do we tell staff they can do a 20% change on a big project, a 20% change on a small project? That's part of what we'll be going through with this language in Module 3.
Wow. I think that may inspire some discussion.
It probably will. It usually does. We find that we get support from it from the development community, because most of the time those issues come up when they get on site and they're building something and they didn't, for some reason, somebody missed it. So it always sounds like, oh my gosh, everyone's going to come in, they're all going to seek adjustments. And the reality is it doesn't turn out that way. However, we have opportunities to put limits on it through the drafting process if that's where the city feels more comfortable.
So could a neighborhood have a 20% adjustment and say, that lot is just really too big? Why can't we have a 20% adjustment so that the stream can fit in more carefully in this whole process?
So some of that goes back to property rights. We can't adjust on someone else's property that way. If they own all of it, we try to set up uniform standards, and that's what their expectation is. If there's something going on that a neighborhood wants to make a change about, this is a great time to talk about how the zoning district dimensions are set up, because they're supposed to be taking into account those things, like where what are appropriate setbacks for this neighborhood if someone's doing infill or redevelopment. And so that's something that we tried to adjust as we went through. However, as you know, as you're reading the draft or the neighborhoods are reading the draft, and the zoning district stuff is the stuff that's been up the longest. That's why we draft that first, so everyone has a time to look at it and see if it's going to work. We can make adjustments to the code itself.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Is there any, do you have any last thoughts or anything you want us to leave with for you?
No, I appreciate the great deal of ideas that you guys have generated today. I'm going to hang up and turn around and get the rest of it going so I can get it back out to you. And, you know, if there's more, please share it with Becky or Jeff. Thank you for your time this morning.
When's
Any
the
last-
next April committee meeting?
The next mid-month?
No, not the
Oh.
mid-month.
Steering committee.
Steering, when is the next steering committee?
The next steering committee meeting is April 25th.
25th.
That's a Thursday. They always start at 4, from 4 to 6. They're located not here, but over in our Planning and Development Services office.
Okay.
And then our next mid-month meeting is, let me get my calendar right here,
May 8th.
And just so I'm clear, the expectation is that that would be when we would maybe go through the actual code and kind of start talking about concerns or thoughts, or what would happen, what's supposed to happen in May 8th?
I'm going to, since Elizabeth will be leading us through that, I'm going to defer to her or have her.
Yeah. Yeah, so we will go through as much as we can on the 8th. We should probably talk about, actually, okay, sorry, I am working this through as I sit here. We will go through the whole thing at a really high level on the 8th, and then as a group, figure out if there are issues we want to pull out for further discussion, and figure out what that looks like in terms of time commitment.
Okay, and our June meeting, where we would potentially vote on this, what date is that? I just off the top of my head, assuming it's the end of June? Last week or the third week?
Always the
24th and the
4th.
26th.
Yeah.
24th and 26th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything is tentatively scheduled, you know, just that caveat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just was trying to think in my, from May 8th to June 24th, what's the time? How
Yeah,
much?
and then I also just wanted to put in that plug too, that we're going to be working on that memo that we'll have out to you before the May mid-month, where you have more information to help you kind of at your desire, get more into the thick of it.
Okay, and then also possibly it said highlighting the changes, so something that's either, I don't know if it's a red line, which sometimes can be hard to read, but like if it's a red line or that, something that also highlights like different changes. Is
And
what I had
when
written
will that be
down.
available?
When will that be available? Sometime before the next mid-month.
So in terms of a version of the code that is redline, that's super challenging because we've moved stuff all over the place. It's pretty unreadable. So that's why we go through and say, focus here, focus here, focus here. If someone really wants to try to go through the red lines, I can see what I can find, but that is painful.
Well, and I just had written down that there'd be a memo beforehand and then.
There will be,
something
yeah.
highlighting
Yeah.
the changes.
Sorry, I misunderstood, yeah.
Two separate things, like here's a memo kind of, and then so like, here are the changes and maybe where you can find them. Not that I would anticipate going through a red
no.
line.
Yeah.
Okay, good, okay, great, thank you.
And I was my notes, I was anticipating that being, that is kind of the context of the memo.
Okay.
So not two separate things, but what the memo will entail.
Okay.
What the changes are and what's not changing, both,
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, there won't be a lot of discussion about what's not changing, but it will be identified for you.
One more minute. Anybody have anything? Otherwise, we can. Anybody else? Nope.
Thank you.
We're going to adjourn. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, everybody, take care.
Can we invite the people who are here to talk to us now? that
Yeah,
were
you can go over there.
Okay.
Once the public meeting is closed, yeah.
Is there a rule?
What the hell are you guys doing here? Bottom line.